I think you can have consciousness without memory. The reason I'm talking about memory is because it's involved in a lot of experiments. So I think it is possible to think about consciousness in the absence of, without thinking about memory at all. But, you know, you have to have some experimental approach to consciousness to be thinking about it in an objective way. So memory turns out to be really important. And I'm really contrasting two kinds of memory. What is sometimes called iconic memory, that has some kind of phenomenology to it, and working memory, which is our cognitive workspace. So, but that's not because I think memory is crucial to consciousness. It's because it's a way of getting a way of approaching the subject where we know something about how to do experiments on. So here is, so just to remind you what's about to happen, I'm going to show you two phenomena that I think give a kind of anecdotal support for my view, okay? So here is the first one. How many have seen this? Anybody seen this? Okay, this is a slow change. So what you are looking at on the screen is changing right now, and your job is to try to figure out what is changing. Don't say, okay, let's just look at it, okay? Try to figure out what's changing. Don't say what's changing if you know. Is this a question about this?
I was about to say when I saw changing.
Oh, no, don't say that. How many saw what was changing? Okay, I'm now going to show you, and I think most of you will be surprised, okay? I'm just going to click on this thing here. See it? Did everybody see? Okay, so here's the thing. Okay, so here is the intuitive force of this. I think this argues strongly from my side. Why do I think that? Because look at that base. It's a huge part of the picture. You were staring at that thing, looking around, moving your eyes around. You know, it was on the screen for almost a minute, I think. You must have looked at that thing a few times. But here's the thing. Why didn't you notice the change? It's because you didn't conceptualize the color. You didn't say to yourself, at the beginning, red, and at the end, purple. You didn't say the words red or purple. If you had conceptualized them, applied your cognition to it, then you would have been able to notice it. But it's hard to notice something that you don't conceptualize. So I think that this suggests that, okay, so there's this thing I haven't introduced, the global workspace. I'll mention that in a minute. The global workspace is an opposed theory of consciousness, opposed to mine. I think I'll explain this in a minute, but I think the reason that something isn't broadcast in the global workspace is it's not conceptualized. Now I'm going to show you another one. How many have seen this? Oh, good. This is, well, I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but just watch and listen to the sound here.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Okay, so now what you're going to see the whole thing over again from a different camera that shows you more.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
But I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Okay, so here, this, by the way, this is a BBC bicycle safety ad, and it's this kind of work that, for example, made people realize that it's really a bad idea to talk on a cell phone while driving. And there's a lot of experimental work that backs that idea up. And the reason is, this is an attentional problem. Now, my opponents like to think of this as inattentional blindness. But I think this case argues for my view, which is inattentional lack of access to the difference. So, and my reason for thinking that is, I mean, look, for example, at the guy who's speaking. You looked right at him. It really, you really must have registered his coat, for example. It was one color at the beginning, another color at the end, and likewise for many other things. So why didn't you notice the difference? Well, I think you didn't notice the difference because you didn't conceptualize that color. So noticing is a lot easier if you conceptualize. Now, I keep using this word, concept. Well, let me just mention one other experiment. So this is a sort of Sperling-like experiment done by a group in Amsterdam. The idea is that you have, at the start, you have a circle of rectangles, 8 rectangles, and then there's a blank period, and then there's another circle of rectangles, and at some point there's a pointer that points at a rectangle, and the job of the subject in the experiment is to say whether the rectangle pointed to is a different orientation from the first one. Everybody get that? Okay, so the answer in all these is yes. The pointer can come at the end, or it can come at the beginning, or it can come in the middle. If it comes at the beginning, people can get almost all 8. If it comes at the end, they can get 4, and the idea here is that's the capacity of working memory, which we talked about before. The new array at the end wipes out your phenomenal memory of the array. The interesting one is in the middle, and here you can get somewhere between 7 and 8. So the 4 at the end is an index of your cognitive access or access consciousness capacity. The one in the middle is an index of your phenomenal memory. So it's these two kinds of memory that are an issue here. Now, of course, my opponents think, oh, how do we know that that memory is a conscious memory? Maybe these things are actually unconscious. And so, and then when you get to Q, there's something is summoned up from unconsciousness. So what is clear, though, is that more items can be held in the non-conceptual. So what I think is that this memory is, and what's really crucial to these experiments, it's a non-conceptual memory. Now, I think that these non-conceptual representations are conscious, but I'll have to wait to get to the evidence for that. So just to remind you, here are the two views, and put in terms of whether attention it promotes conceptualization, as I think, or whether it is needed for consciousness. And I should say, by the way, which probably people here aren't aware of, which is that in recent years, philosophers have become very tied in with a lot of discussions in psychology and neuroscience, AI. And so these people are, the disagreements here are equally split between philosophers and scientists. Now, I've been using this word concept. The word concept is actually ambiguous between a sense in which it means something that can be shared among many people, something kind of abstract that's at the top, something meaning-like, or this mental representation sense that was used by, for example, the British empiricists. So I'm going with the mental representation sense. It's just, I'm just telling you about terminology. Now, this notion of a concept is often puzzles people. There's a famous case that helps to illustrate what our on the notion of a concept. There's this French philosopher named Bruno Latour who said that Ramses II could not have died of tuberculosis because it wasn't discovered then. And this is an actual quote. Before Koch, the bacillus had no real existence. To say that Ramses II died of tuberculosis is as absurd as saying that he died of machine gun fire. And so I quote this partly because it's kind of funny. But the idea here is that he's confusing the concept, in my sense, with what it's a concept of. And so that helps to illustrate the idea. What I think is that that conscious experience is non-conceptual. Here is one of many experiments that suggest that. This is an experiment done on 12-month-old babies. And so there's a screen, they're looking at the screen, an object comes out one side, a different colored object comes out the other side, then the screen goes down, and the babies do not expect two things, okay? So they don't register color. It's an interesting thing about color in babies, but their color vision is fine. At 4 to 6 months, they have all the basic color discriminations. If anybody's interested, I can explain how they tell that. But they do not use color in reasoning between about 4 to 6 months and starting maybe a little like 12 to 18 months, they start using color in reasoning. So their appreciation of color is non-conceptual. Okay, so here is a little kind of brain illustration of some of the ideas that are at issue here. This is the back of the head where vision starts. You know, the light comes in your eyes. It the signals are sent from retina to something in the middle of your brain, the lateral geniculate nucleus, and they go to the first cortical visual areas in the back of your head. These arrows indicate attention. This means that the person is attending to the stimulus. The arrow pointing to the back of the head where vision starts is attention to the stimulus. So this is a diagram of a brain when somebody is uncontroversially conscious of a stimulus. The person is attending to it. There are all these reciprocal connections, reciprocal activations going into frontal cortex. The key here is frontal cortex. That's where thought, reasoning, decision-making live in the brain. And my opponents think, the people who think all consciousness is access consciousness, that it's that triggering the activation. It's called ignition that makes that creates these neural correlations with frontal cortex that are the key to consciousness. Here is an undeniably unconscious perception. There's something called priming. If you get a stimulus, it affects your later recognition. So, for example, if I have an unconscious subliminal presentation of the word doctor, I'll be quicker to recognize the word nurse as a word if I've seen it. Here is the controversial case, which my opponent Stanislas Dehaene calls preconscious. And that is where you have attention away from the stimulus. You get strong loops in the back of the head, but no reportability unless attention shifts. So he thinks that's not conscious. I say that it's probably conscious.